Hello, everyone, and welcome to Penning the Past, Insights into San Diego's Historic Neighborhoods and Architecture, Soho's monthly lecture series that brings together historians, authors, researchers, and preservationists to explore the people, architecture, and communities that define the San Diego region. I'm Dean Glass, and I'm glad you could join us today. What can the lives of individual women tell us about the development of an entire neighborhood? In Down the Rabbit Hole, the Women of Talmadge, historian Laura Henson introduces us to some of the often overlooked women who helped establish and define this San Diego community. Through biography and place-based research, she reveals how individual lives can illuminate broader themes of housing, independence, opportunity, and community identity. Laura is a local historian, preservation advocate, and president of the Talmadge Historical Society. She is also the author of the award-recognized Down the Rabbit Hole, the Women of Talmadge series, upon which today's program is based. Before turning her attention to local history, Laura spent 15 years as a family systems psychotherapist, specializing in the effects of trauma and helping people move beyond difficult experiences toward more purposeful and rewarding lives. We're delighted to have her with us today. You may enter any questions at any point during using the Q&A or the chat feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll get to as many of those as we can after the presentation. Today's program is also being recorded for Soho's YouTube channel. And now, please join me in welcoming Laura Henson.
To Down the Rabbit Hole, the Women of Talmadge, unearthing their hidden stories. When I first began researching the history of Talmadge, I thought I was studying houses. Instead, I found extraordinary women. Today, I'd like to take you on that journey, down the rabbit hole, to discover the forgotten women whose lives helped shape both Talmadge and the history of San Diego. Every journey begins, and mine began with the women, both the famous Talmadge sisters, Norma, Natalie, and Constance, and my own paternal grandmother, Teresa Henson. The Talmadge sisters were among the biggest stars of the silent film era. Their celebrity was used to market the 4 Talmadge subdivisions developed on the Kensington and Talmadge mesas during the mid-1920s. 2 of those subdivisions eventually became the Talmadge Park Estates Historic District, which was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in March of 2024. At first, I thought this project would simply be about the history of the neighborhood. I couldn't have been more wrong. The creation of the Talmadge Park Estates Historic District, made possible through the dedication of Talmadge community volunteers and the professional expertise of Priscilla Ambergi and Eileen Magno of Heritage Architecture, provided the foundation for everything that follows. Without the extensive research required to document and establish the district, many of these women's stories might never have been discovered. As I researched the neighborhood's development and the history of its homes, one pattern immediately caught my attention. A number of single women living here during the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. Using assessors' lots and block books, city directories, census records, newspapers, notices of completion, and countless historical records, I began to uncover lives marked by courage, perseverance, and resilience during some of America's most difficult decades. What began as architectural research gradually became something more personal. I realized I wasn't just documenting historic houses. I was uncovering the women who transformed those houses into homes, neighborhoods, and communities. My fascination with these women was deeply influenced by my own grandmother's story. In 1941, near the end of the Great Depression, my grandfather died by suicide, leaving my grandmother suddenly widowed with 2 young sons, one of them being my father. With only $50 in her purse, she boarded a Greyhound bus from St. Louis to San Diego to begin again. Sorry, it's just emotional. Attended beauty school, opened a beauty salon on Adams Avenue, just minutes from Talmadge, and built a successful business while raising her boys as a single mother. An immigrant from Austria, she never graduated from high school, She faced extraordinary hardship with courage, determination, and grace. I'm so sorry I didn't anticipate this. As I reflect on her life, I found myself asking a simple question. If my grandmother could overcome such adversity, how many other remarkable women had been forgotten by history? I soon discovered the answer. The women of Talmadge did not disappoint. What I found was simply a history. What I found wasn't simply a history of a neighborhood. It was a history of dozens of women whose life reflected the courage, resilience, determination, and hope that shaped both Talmadge and San Diego. The first woman I encountered was Alma Staggs. Alma occupies a unique place in Talmadge history because she built the first structure within what is now the Talmadge Park Estates Historic District. Interestingly, the first building wasn't a home. It was a restaurant known as the Talmadge Tavern. Like so many people during the 1920s, Alma was captivated by the glamour of the Talmadge sisters, whose Hollywood fame helped promote the new subdivision. The tavern quickly became the social heart of the neighborhood. According to the San Diego Union and Evening Tribune, it hosted holiday celebrations, community gatherings, and special events at a time when there were few other places where neighbors could come together. Little did I know that researching Alma would lead me down one of the deepest and most moving rabbit holes of the entire project. Following the stock market crash of 1929 and the onset of the Great Depression, the Talmadge Tavern took on a new role. It became part of the subdivision's marketing strategy, offering free lunches and educational lectures that promoted the dream of homeownership during one of the nation's most difficult economic periods. As I dug deeper into Alma's life through articles preserved in the San Diego Union Tribune archive, a far more personal story began to emerge. Behind the success of the tavern was a woman enduring severe domestic violence. Her marriage was quickly annulled after her husband knocked out several of her front teeth, and newspaper accounts even suggested he later shot at her through the tavern window. Despite unimaginable hardship, Alma persevered. Tragically, the Talmadge Tavern was eventually destroyed by fire, bringing an end to one of the neighborhood's earliest landmarks. But Alma's story did not end there. In many ways, it was only the beginning of her legacy. Influence extended far beyond the Talmadge Tavern. Her entrepreneurial spirit lived on through her son, Manuel Romain Shackelford, who became one of San Diego's most successful restaurateurs. His career helped shape the city's dining and entertainment scene for decades. Among the establishments associated with him were Top's Nightclub, the legendary El Cortez Sky Room, and Guadalajara Mexican Restaurant in Old Town, places that became San Diego landmarks in their own right. Although the Talmadge Tavern disappeared nearly a century ago, Alma's pioneering spirits continued through her family, leaving a lasting mark on both Talmadge and San Diego's hospitality and culinary history. As I continued my research, I began noticing something unexpected. Alma's story wasn't unique. Again and again, I encountered women whose life were defined not by tragedy, by what they did to overcome it. Doris's story is one of profound loss, remarkable resilience, and the healing power of community. During her extraordinary life, Doris outlived 3 husbands, 2 children, and 2 stepchildren before passing away at the age of 102. Despite experiencing so much heartbreak, she was deeply loved by her family, church, neighbors, and friends. Those who knew her remember her warmth, generosity, and quiet strength. As I researched Doris's life, I couldn't help noticing the parallels with Alma Staggs. Both women married 3 times, both endured the heartbreaking loss of a child, both faced hardship that might easily have defined their lives. Instead, they chose to keep moving forward. What also became clear was the importance of community. Doris found love again when she married a neighbor following the death of her second husband. Alma met her third husband through her church after he had become widowed. Neighbors, churches, friendships, community. Again and again, these became the foundation that allowed these women not simply to survive tragedy, but to build meaningful and fulfilling lives afterward. Doris reminds us that resilience is rarely a solitary journey. It is often sustained by the people willing to walk beside us. One of the most fascinating discoveries in my research began with what appeared to be nothing more than a clerical error. In the 1939 County Assessor's records, Ada York was mistakenly listed as Adam York. Most people probably would have overlooked it. Fortunately, curiosity got the better of me. Once I realized Adam was actually Ada, I discovered she was a widowed single mother and a member of the Osage Nation of Oklahoma. Her story immediately captured my attention, especially because I was conducting this research around the same time that the Oscar-nominated movie Killers of the Flower Moon renewed public interest in Osage history. The Osage were forced from Kansas to present-day Oklahoma during the 19th century, where vast oil reserves were later discovered beneath their land. Although many Osage families became extraordinarily wealthy, tribal members, particularly women, were often placed under a federal guardianship systems administered by the Office of Indian Affairs. In many cases, non-Osage men were appointed to manage their finances. Ada's husband, who was of English descent, died after the family relocated to California. That discovery led me to another historic rabbit hole. Did Ada petition for and receive a certificate of competency, allowing her to manage her own oil income after becoming widowed? I still don't know, but that's one of the things I love about historical research. Every answer seems to lead to another question. Another discovery was Ada's deep Catholic faith. She was an active member of Mary Star of the Sea Catholic Church in La Jolla, reflecting a tradition shared by many Osage families whose conversion to Catholicism dates back to the 19th century missionaries. As I continued researching Ada's family, another remarkable connection emerged. Her son John was stationed in Honolulu with the 251st Coastal Artillery Regiment on December 7, 1941, when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. Like so many young Americans of his generation, his life changed forever that morning. John remained in Hawaii for the rest of his life. What began as a simple error in an assessor's record had unexpectedly connected Talmadge to one of the most significant events in American history. And as I would soon discover, Ada's greatest legacy wasn't her remarkable heritage. It was the way she built community wherever she lived. As fascinating as Ada's Osage heritage was, what impressed me most was the life she built here in San Diego. Like many members of the Osage Nation, she understood the importance of community. She recreated that sense of belonging through her church and her involvement in civic and social organizations. The San Diego Union frequently mentions her participation in community events, and longtime Talmadge resident Vic Whitaker fondly remembers her as a kind neighbor lady who always gave him candy when he was a child. That simple memory says something profound. People rarely remember us for our accomplishments alone. They remember how they made us feel. Ada left a legacy not only through her heritage, but through her kindness. As I researched Ada's life, I couldn't help thinking about Robert Putnam's book, Bowling Alone. Putnam argues that during the 1920s through the 1950s, Americans were far more engaged in churches, civic organizations, neighborhood groups, and social clubs than they are today. Those connections matter. They strengthen communities, foster resilience, and contribute to people's overall well-being. Ada embodies those values. Throughout her life, she remained active in her church, civic organizations, and friendships. Even after being widowed for 39 years, she continued building community around her. She spent the last 20 years of her life in a home on Mission Bay Walk, which means she had a home on the bay, and died at the age of 88. Studying these women has made me wonder whether one of the greatest lessons they offered us is not simply resilience, but the importance of never facing life's hardship alone, but through community. Of all the women I've encountered and down the rabbit hole, Eleanor Golland's story may be the most heartbreaking. Yet it is also one of the most powerful and hopeful. By now, you've probably noticed a pattern. Again and again, these women experienced devastating loss. Again and again, they found the strength to begin anew. Eleanor purchased her Talmadge home in 1941, the same year she was widowed at just 28 years of age. She was suddenly left to raise a one-year-old son and two-month-old daughter on her own. Her husband, Lieutenant Victor S. Golland, was a West Point graduate, naval aviator, accomplished athlete, and promising young officer. On New Year's Eve, 1940, Victor narrowly escaped death when he parachuted from a military bomber after it developed mechanical problems over Texas. 4 of the 5 crew members survived the parachute jump. Victor was one of them. Imagine the relief his family must have felt. Only 4 days later, on January 4th, 1941, those 4 survivors and the accident investigation team boarded another aircraft to return to San Diego. In dense fog, 20 miles from the San Diego airport, the plane struck the summit of Mother Grundy Peak. Everyone aboard was killed. The wreckage came to rest only about 20 feet below the top of the mountain. I cannot imagine Eleanor's emotional journey. 1 week she was celebrating her husband's miraculous survival. 4 days later, she was planning his funeral. I often wonder whether the neighbors she had just met in Talmadge became the support system that helped carry her through those first difficult months. Fortunately, Eleanor was well educated. She had a 4-year college degree, became a substitute teacher, and later worked as a research assistant for the San Diego School Board of Education. Like so many women in this project, she refused to let tragedy define the rest of her life. 20 years after Victor's death, Eleanor found love again. In 1961, she married Roy Newton, a recently widowed West Point graduate and longtime friend of Victor's. Their marriage lasted until Roy's death in 1984. Coincidentally, or perhaps symbolically, Eleanor had lived in her Talmadge home for exactly 20 years before beginning this new chapter and moving with Roy to San Carlos. Even more telling, her son and his family continued living in the Talmadge home until the 1980s. I'd like to think that this reflects the affection the family felt, not only for the house, but for the neighborhood that may have helped sustain them during those darkest years. Eleanor herself passed away on Valentine's Day in 2004, 20 years after Roy's death. While researching her life, I became intrigued by how often the number 20 appeared in pivotal moments. Curious, I explored whether it held any symbolic meaning. Although 20 is not among literature's most prominent symbolic numbers, in the Bible it often reflects waiting, preparation, and beginning a new chapter after a period of endurance. Whether coincident or not, the symbolism seems remarkably fitting. Again and again, the number 20 marked a transition in Eleanor's life, the close of one chapter and the beginning of another. Her story reminds us that resilience is not the absence of grief. It is the courage to continue writing the next chapter of our lives. One final rabbit hole led me to 2 remarkable women whose story reflects both friendship and service. In August of 1941, 2 single Navy nurses, one widowed and one divorced, purchased homes next door to one another on Jean Drive. Both houses were built by the same builder, John Lovett. It seems likely they imagined sharing a life as neighbors after their military service. History had other plans. Just 4 months later, the United States entered World War II following the attack on Pearl Harbor. My research suggests that both women rented out their Talmadge homes while serving during the war. Each went on to have a distinguished career in the Navy Nurse Corps. Lieutenant Commander Combs retired in 1947. First Lieutenant Wolfe retired in 1946. Lieutenant Commander Combs died only 3 years later at the age of 55. First Lieutenant Wolfe eventually returned to her home on Jean Drive, where she lived for the rest of her life before passing away in 1985 at the age of 89. I often find myself wondering about their friendship. Choosing to buy homes next to one another suggests more than coincidence. Perhaps they envisioned building their future together as neighbors. Instead, they answered their nation's call. Their story reminds us that the history of Talmadge is inseparable from the history of our country. By now, you've probably realized I've only scratched the surface. There will definitely be an Act 2 of Down the Rabbit Hole, The Women of Talmadge. I already have 6 more remarkable women waiting in the wings, each offering a unique window into the lives of the women in San Diego during the 1920s, 30s, and 40s. One was a mathematics teacher who shared her home with her mother. Another was an Italian-born pharmacist who endured the heartbreaking loss of her 12-year-old son. One created the beloved children's game, Candyland. Another was a Russian opera singer. One was a passionate naturalist who successfully persuaded the city of San Diego not to build a road in order to preserve a rare tree, the tree that still stands within the historic district today. And then there is the mother who moved her family from Mexico to Talmadge in search of a better life, only to survive an attempt by her husband to kill her. 6 women, 6 very different lives, yet every one of them reflects the same theme I've encountered throughout the journey: courage, perseverance, community, and hope. There are still many rabbit holes waiting to be explored. One of the greatest rewards of this project has been discovering that history doesn't simply tell us about the past. It can inspire actions in the present. After I shared the story of the Talmadge Tavern with homeowner Angela Flynn and explained that her property occupies the site of the original tavern, she became deeply interested in both the story and the Talmadge Park Historic District. When the Historic District sign was installed at the corner of 44th Street and Monroe Avenue, the location of the original tavern, Angela took that interest even further. Working with her community and the California Native Plant Society, she helped beautify the parkway surrounding the sign and the original Talmadge Tavern stone wall, which still stands nearly 100 years later. She also has taken the lead in restoring the historic stone wall, ensuring one of the neighborhood's earliest landmarks will be preserved for future generations. To me, that's the true power of local history. Stories connect us to the people who came before us. They inspire us to care for the places they left behind. And they bring communities together to preserve the legacy we will then one day leave to others. I came earlier this year when I attended the California Preservation Conference in Riverside. There I attended a presentation on the Los Angeles Women's Landmark Project. I learned that of all of the 13,000 designated historic cultural monuments in Los Angeles, only about 2% recognize women's history. To address the imbalance, the Los Angeles Conservancy and the National Trust of Historic Preservation, through its Where Women Made History initiative, are identifying, researching, and designating places associated with women's contribution to their city's history. The project also partners with local universities, engaging the next generation of preservationists in researching women's history and preparing national landmarks. In addition, they produce short YouTube documentaries exploring women's history, architecture, and historic preservation. Collectively, those videos have been viewed more than 1.5 million times. As I listened to the presentation, I couldn't help thinking, why not San Diego? So I approached the National Trust of Historic Preservation and asked whether they would help us create a similar program here in San Diego. I'm delighted to say they said yes. Today, you've heard the stories of only a handful of women. Imagine what might be discovered if an entire city began looking into women's history. Because that's what historic preservation is really about. It's not just preserving buildings, it's preserving the lives, the courage, and the stories of the people who gave those places meaning. My hope is that Down the Rabbit Hole becomes more than an article series. I hope it inspires others to uncover, preserve, and share the forgotten stories that are still waiting to be found, not only here in Talmadge, but throughout San Diego. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Laura. We're all looking forward to the rest of this series or more of this series, and maybe we can have you back for a future Penning the Past to talk about more of these wonderful women. If you have any questions, anybody, please put them in the chat or the Q&A feature. Let's start with this one. Looking at all these women together, do you think there was something about Talmadge that made it particularly attractive or accessible to women buying homes on their own?
Um, yeah, so it was probably had something to do with how Talmadge was built. Talmadge was mostly built as part of the FHA program that was started part of the New Deal by Roosevelt to jumpstart the building industry after the Great Depression. So many of these homes were considered affordable, and they were also built to cater to the workers for the factories at Consolidated Aircraft and also, well, Consolidated Aircraft that later became Convair. So these neighborhoods were created to be working class neighborhoods that could help support the war effort, and they were affordable. So I believe many of these single women were widowed, or they were teachers and Hoover High School was nearby. Um, or let me think, what else? Yeah, and mostly connected to the military effort that was going on at the time, and were widows.
Okay, let's go on. Of all the things you uncovered in researching these women, what discovery surprised you the most?
Well, just how resilient they were. Um, and also, when you research these women, they are very socially engaged. When you research the archives and the newspaper, these women were involved in all kinds of groups, not only church organizations, Masonic groups, um, PTA. They were just very socially engaged. And I do think it's easier to grieve when you have social support.
Okay, when you start down one of these rabbit holes, what usually gives you the first clue, and how do you decide which trail is worth following?
There was a wonderful team. I'd like to mention them. Don Anderson was one of them, and also Diana Meyer. They did a lot of the archival research into the lock and block books for me, and also into the city directories. And they were the ones that brought to my attention the Talmadge Tavern, and also that there were so many widowed women in Talmadge. So it was their initial research that was part of creating the historic district that showed me that there was a trend here. And then you just start going down these rabbit holes, and these amazing stories reveal themselves. And as I said, I had six more, and I'm sure that there's more to be found. But it's really they're just there for the picking. um, these women, and in my next series, I won't be just focusing on single women. We had some married women that were doing some remarkable things, like the woman that I referenced, who was the naturalist. She used to take her sons down into the canyons that surround Talmadge and explore all the different vegetation and all the different animals. And she was the one that discovered this rare tree that was supposed to be, torn down in order to build a road. And she took her sons and herself by bus down to City Hall and convinced them that the street should not go through because of this beautiful tree, which still does exist in the neighborhood, and it is magnificent.
How do we get more information about the women yeah, of history in San Diego?
Well, so I have talked to Alana at Soho, and she is also interested in partnering with me and the National Trust to start our own program here in San Diego of researching women's history. The National Trust would like to create a context statement on women in San Diego. So if you put your name and email address in the chat feature of this webinar, Alana and I will be happy to reach out to you and let you know how you can donate and help be a part of this. It didn't take much for me to find these amazing stories, so I know there are more out there. We just need to start documenting them. And there's people like the Putnam sisters who created the Timken Gallery and also donated a lot of paintings to the San Diego Museum of Art. They have homes that still exist in San Diego, and it would be nice to see perhaps them get designated if they're not already designated. And people like Kate Sessions, who lived in Mission Hills. So there's lots of famous women that we can also dig into, but even all these remarkable women that lived in a middle-class neighborhood, a working-class neighborhood in Talmadge, um, some of them, especially the one who wrote Candyland, maybe that house could be designated.
There's also an Arcadia book called Remarkable Women of San Diego, I believe,
Oh,
that I have not read, so I don't know if I can recommend it yet, but it's out there for research purposes. Um,
wonderful. Thank you.
Talmadge is now recognized as a historic district. How does knowing the personal stories behind the houses change the way we think about preserving the neighborhood?
People get excited about the stories. And the example of Angela Flynn, hearing about the stories inspired her to do some beautification in a parkway and also restore a historic wall. So the beauty of learning these stories is that it connects us to something and that we can connect to each other today. Preservation isn't just about the past, it's about the relationships you create today. Creating the historic district during the middle of a pandemic was probably the hardest thing I have ever done. And yet the friendships that were developed out of that are priceless. And so it's the best thing I've ever done, even though it was the hardest.
Wonderful. You already talked about that. Have neighbors, descendants, and people who actually knew these women added anything to the story since you began the series?
So one neighbor who was a friend with Doris, she was the one who provided me some pictures and shared some more information about Doris with me. Also, when I was exploring the obituary on Doris, which was very long and lovely, I discovered that one of my closest friends knew her. So I reached out to her and said, "Why didn't you tell me about Doris?" And she said, "I did. I did tell you about Doris. She was this remarkable older woman that I helped take care of at the end of her life. She no longer lived in Talmadge. She was living with her daughter in Kensington at that time. And she had told me about Doris. I just hadn't made the connection that it was the Doris of Talmadge." So anyway, yes, I have had people let me know. At some point, further research, I might try to reach out to see if there are family members that remember these women or have further information they can share.
Do you think women's contributions to neighborhood history have been overlooked because they often happen in less visible ways?
Yes, and I think that's demonstrated by what they discovered in Los Angeles, that of all the historic designations and monuments, only 2% reflected women. And so I do think we're an underrepresented group. And I think we have a plan to address that.
Great. This isn't a question, but simply a statement of how wonderful this presentation was. Laura, you have done something very important here. Thank you so much for bringing these remarkable women, their stories, and these places to all of us. I will be sharing this with all my friends once the recording is available. I also loved the passion and emotion you brought to the presentation. You made it clear that these stories matter, and they absolutely do. Thank you for telling them. That was a nice
Well,
compliment.
thank you. Yeah, I didn't expect to get so emotional about my grandmother, but my mom just passed away and my dad passed away 2 years ago. So I'm very much into my own archiving my own family history, and um, I'm very touched by the remarkable women I've had in my life. And so I'm so glad that they inspired me to explore the women of Talmadge because they are unbelievable. These women were really um, present in a time that our country was in a Great Depression and beginning of a World War. And I mean, those were tough times, and yet they survived and thrived.
Wonderful. Let's see. Yes, somebody said, yes, lovely, as well as informative presentation as expected. All right, so we're running out of questions here, and we're kind of early on time. Do you have anything you'd like to add? Maybe an anecdote about the Talmadge sisters or anything?
Sure. So I'm currently writing another series because it is our centennial anniversary here in Talmadge. Um, and let me see if I can share an article I wrote about the Talmadge sisters on our website.
Let me bring you back to the spotlight. Oh, I need to remove mine.
Yeah, so here we go.
Oh,
Yeah. So I have recently done a deeper dive into the Talmadge sisters. As you can see, we have Constance, Natalie, and Norma, but we also have their mother, Peg. And they would have not been successful without this unbelievable stage mother who really orchestrated their careers. And she orchestrated them separately. Each one of them had a different niche. And that was probably because she had three daughters and she didn't want them to be competitive with one another. And so she was very skillful at making sure that they got good contracts and that they were represented fairly in their negotiations. And yeah, she is a remarkable person in and of herself. Um, Norma was the considered the beauty of the family, and she was the most famous. She had the most successful career. And Constance was the cutest one and kind of the girl next door. And then Natalie got more involved in the business end of the industry. Norma married the president of United Artists, Joseph Schenck, who is very famous. And Natalie married Buster Keaton, the famous silent screen star, who also had his own production company. And she was very instrumental in moving him away from his company to United Artists. Sadly, there was an unintended consequence. He lost a lot of his creative ability when he moved to United Artists, and his alcoholism became far worse. But he still made films despite that difficulty. Constance is interesting. She married a Greek tycoon and then lost her American citizenship because of that. Um, and then the marriage didn't last very long. And then they did, I think he cheated on her, if I remember correctly. And then she went on to regain her American citizenship. Um, None of the women transferred very well. I mean, Natalie only made one movie with Buster, but the other two women didn't really translate very well into talkies, and they went on to do other things. Even though here's the when they had the grand opening um, in Talmadge in Kensington, not here in Talmadge, but the Talmadge Park One in Kensington was where they had the grand opening. And there's Joseph Schenck, there's Buster Keaton, and then there's the three Talmadge sisters. And this is some creative photography here. They didn't really have that many people show up because it was a rainy day. But it was a very big deal that these Hollywood celebrities came to San Diego in order to promote this subdivision. And it did make a huge difference. And Buster Keaton and Joseph Schenck invested tremendously in the community. Talmadge would not have existed if it hadn't been for their money. And then the Great Depression hit, and eventually they all ended up pulling out of Talmadge for financial reasons. But they did help jumpstart not only the Talmadge Park communities in Kensington, but also in Talmadge. Any other questions about the Talmadge sisters? I mean, you can go to our website and go under stories under Centennial and read more about them. They were remarkable actresses and businesswomen. And to go back to the Los Angeles Conservancy, I have asked them to research the Talmadge sisters, who still have their original homes in Los Angeles. And so they're very excited in that. And one of them is in West Hollywood, and they actually call it Norma, there's a name for it. It's a Norma triangle. So Norma had a studio and a place where she took pictures and her home all within this triangle. And it's actually called the Norma Triangle. So I've asked the Conservancy to investigate that and to do some YouTube videos on them and see if some of their homes might be able to be historically designated.
Yeah, I mentioned to Laura when we were talking earlier that a couple years ago I watched Norma Talmadge's only two talkie movies before she retired, and they were pretty terrible movies, although I found her to be very compelling, and her voice was fine, her acting was great. She just needed better films, and she probably could have kept her career going,
Mhm.
my opinion.
Yeah, perhaps. Yeah, those were really interesting times. There was I don't know if it's still on. I recently saw they were going to remove it. I believe it was on Netflix, called The Titans, and it was about the movie industry transitioning from non-talking movies to talking movies, and just how challenging that was. But certainly Joseph Schenck and Norma and Constance would have been a part of that major transition.
Laura, thank you so much for joining us and for introducing us to these remarkable women. Your research demonstrates how much we can learn about a neighborhood by looking closely at the individual lives connected to it. And thank you to everyone who joined us today. Our next Penning,
Thank you.
our next Penning the Past presentation will take place on Saturday, September 12th from 11 a.m. to noon, where we'll explore 90 years of classic San Diego tiki with our friend Martin S. Lindsay. That should be a fun one. We hope you'll join us again next month. Until then, thank you all for supporting Save Our Heritage organization, and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you so much, Laura. That was great, and we look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you.